Story 1. I got out of the shower and dressed. My husband was on a work trip, and the kids were at school. On the kitchen counter was a half-empty can of Mountain Dew. I do not know anyone who drinks Mountain Dew. My front door was unlocked, but I could find no one in the house. Story 2. I woke with a start at 3:21 a.m. A small ball of light passed through my bathroom door, making it creak as if someone had opened it. It hung there like a bright marble for a few seconds, then slowly turned and vanished into my closet. At 4:32 a.m., after I had finally calmed down and fallen back asleep, every light in my apartment turned on at once. The overhead, the closet, the nightstand, the computer desk, and the kitchen light above the sink. I sat bolt upright and heard a low-pitched, squeaky giggle. The lights all went out. I got up and started my day. Story 3. One time, a maintenance worker I did not know walked into my apartment. I rarely lock the door when I am home, and the worker started a conversation as if it were normal to walk into a stranger's home and speak. I was so freaked out. Who the fuck are you? Story 4. Lying in bed, fast asleep, I heard a noise and a raspy, high-pitched voice calling, "Mommy, mommy." I woke just enough to see a tiny pale hand wrap around the corner of my bed. No head, no body, just a hand. I screamed. The thing screamed too, and my spouse woke to both of us screaming. It turned out my youngest had had a nightmare and wanted to be cuddled. Instead of being the calm parent, I thought the house was haunted. Edit. In my defense, my kids never call me mommy. They call me mama. It was so out of the blue and extremely creepy. I regret nothing. Story 5. Someone climbed through my bedroom window. This happened almost a decade ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon and I was sleeping in because it was my day off and I worked night shifts. My dog, who was about 13 years old and mostly blind and deaf, was lying on my bedroom floor. I thought someone was talking to her but figured I was dreaming in my half-asleep state and went back to sleep. I woke up when I thought I heard it again and heard wind, but realized I didn't have my window open. It was fairly dark and I didn't have my contacts in, so I couldn't see much except a figure crouched on the recliner by my window that my cat liked to use. I woke up and said, "What the hell?" The guy stammered something about being my brother's friend and that my brother must not be home, and he jumped out the window. I was still half asleep and texted my brother to tell his friends to use the door and not my window next time. Both my parents and my brother rushed home from work, and until they got there my brother sent his one friend who lived nearby, along with others, to make sure I was okay. When his friend arrived, the two small dogs in the living room barked like crazy at the friends who came to check on me but had not made a sound when the person was in my room. It took me quite a few hours to realize what had happened and what could have happened. At first I was angry that I had been woken up on my day off. There is now a bar across my childhood bedroom window and it is no longer possible to pop the screen out. Story 6. I came home from a late shift at 1 in the morning. I switched on the light and there was a man sleeping on my sofa. I managed not to scream, left quietly, and called the police. It turned out he was a drunk neighbor who lived one floor above me. Our landlord had saved money by using the same lock and key for every unit. The neighbor was too drunk to remember how many stairs he had climbed and thought my apartment was his. He said the couch felt strange, but because his key had opened the door he had no doubts. Story 7. Not at home, but at work. I work in an aged care facility. One resident had died a few days earlier in my area of responsibility. The facility is impeccably maintained. Everything is in order and rooms are locked after a death until family clear the items. I had slept well before my shift, but 2 nights ago during the night shift the door handle to that room rattled and moved as if someone were trying to open it every time I walked past. I took the master key and looked inside. All windows were tightly shut, all vents were closed, and there was no explanation for the movement. It really creeped me out. I now dread patrolling that hallway. 3 people have died there recently and it gives off strange vibes, especially when I walk past that room. But I know what I saw and heard. Story 8. All I can think of is the time I was weeding the front yard. There was one weed with a huge sprawling plant anchored in the middle by a single root. When I lifted that mat-like plant, Underneath was a solid blanket of earwigs. Thousands of them. I am not afraid of bugs, but that was too many earwigs. Story 9. About 8 years earlier, I had moved into my house. It was just my dog and me. I had not lived on my own for years but felt very safe living in that small mountain town in Montana. It was dark outside and I was on the couch reading a Reddit thread on my phone. People were sharing scary experiences they had had in their homes, many about home invasions. As I read, I felt smug, knowing I did not need to worry about a home invasion where I lived. That thought had barely left when there was a tremendous bang at the front door and the door swung open violently. I was frozen for a second, imagining the worst. Then my neighbor's large Great Pyrenees dog stepped in. Apparently, I had not closed my door all the way, and the friendly dog had come to visit my dog and get a biscuit. His timing could not have been better. There was also a screw that flew horizontally between my friend and me as we sat talking, passed between us and then dropped straight down. It was the same screw I had spent half an hour looking for after I dropped it while taking down a ceiling light. Story 10. In the early 2000s, I lived in an apartment that was more than 100 years old. I would always hear strange noises, like someone coming up the stairs but stopping at the top, then dead silence. Nobody was ever there. My mother kept saying she felt odd about her bedroom and hallway, so I put a webcam in the hallway that had a motion alert that would play an audible sound through my personal computer speakers. Weeks went by with nothing. Then one day, when I was there alone, it went off. I looked at my monitor and saw a tall dark mass in the doorway to her bedroom. My room was right off the hallway, so I tiptoed over, cracked my door open, and saw it with my own eyes. A very tall, solid dark mass. It appeared about 1 foot off the floor. It was not exactly human-shaped, just a lean, tall shape of darkness. It felt like 10 minutes passed while I stared at it, but it was only a few seconds. It moved quickly to the right and out of view. I mustered my courage, walked to the door, and looked into the room. Nothing was there. I'll never forget that experience. Story 11. One morning, I woke up to a wolf spider mother on the pillow next to me, staring me down with her brood on her back. Story 12. When we first moved into this house, my 2 cats would just sit in the middle of the empty basement, staring into space. Story 13. At the time, I saw my dog walk into the den. I got up to check on her and almost tripped over her because she was lying down near my feet. There were no other pets in the house. Story 14. These are the remnants of a murder that occurred in my kitchen before I moved in. The man was shot by a neighbor through the window while doing his dishes and listening to music. There are chipped tiles and holes in my refrigerator from shotgun pellets. The kitchen is poorly renovated. I imagine much of it was damaged by the gunfire and blood. It is both creepy and sad, and I try not to think about it. Story 15. A pair of eyes stared at me from the dark closet. I freaked out for a second. It was my black cat, who promptly jumped out and nudged me to feed her. Story 16. A burglar walked quickly toward me at night as I walked toward him, hoping he would get scared. He did not become frightened and refused to leave, even after I called the police. Story 17. The house I grew up in had a cellar door in the laundry room. One night, someone tried to push it open. My mother stepped on the door and told us to run to the car. The next day, when we returned, there was a big footprint on my bed. Story 18. Back in high school, I was streaming a show on my laptop while sitting in the basement of our house. After feeling something touch me, I looked over and saw the biggest spider I have ever seen to this day, sitting on my shoulder. I freaked out. My first instinct was to rip off my shirt and run upstairs topless while screaming. Needless to say, my mom was very confused. I did not hang out in our basement for at least 2 years after that. It still gives me shivers to think about. Story 19. I was in my bedroom and turned to see an orange-yellow eye watching me from the crack in the door. My blood ran cold before I realized it was my neighbor's dog, who had invited himself in. I got a good laugh afterward, but he scared the hell out of me for a second. Story 20. Once, in the house where I grew up, I woke in the middle of the night and saw eyes looking at me from outside my bedroom. After my eyes adjusted, I realized it was our dog, and my heart was in my throat for a few seconds. I laughed. Story 21. A man was standing in my kitchen holding a butcher knife. I had a few friends over and one of my friends had brought a guest. After everyone left, the guest returned saying he had lost his wallet. I opened the door for him and began searching between the couch cushions. When I turned around, he was gone. I went into the kitchen and found him holding the knife in one hand and his companion, Peter, in the other. I ran into my children's bedroom and shut and locked the door. He eventually left. Story 22. When I was a kid, a rope with a hangman's knot hung in my attic. I don't know why it was there. Felt unpleasant and creepy. Story 23. At about 2 in the morning, I heard the pitter-patter of little feet running up and down the hall and the sound of a child giggling. My 4-year-old was sleepwalking. Story 24. Not seen but heard. I have 2 stories from about 20 years ago. My parents were divorcing and the atmosphere in the house was tense. There were constant fights and aggression. Both events happened when I was around 9 or 10, so I do not remember which came first. My father worked in information technology since the early 1980s, and I learned most of what I knew about technology from him. I was a bit ahead of my age in tech knowledge at the time. He had an office in the basement of our large, new 4-floor house. He was away at work until after 5 in the evening, so the office was rarely used and became my test area. The first event happened while I was on the computer looking at some strange websites. Suddenly I heard an indescribable demonic growl mixed with a light laugh right next to my right ear. It was not subtle or faint. I am completely deaf in my right ear, but I clearly felt the sound's vibration against my skull and a small breeze on my ear, like someone whispering. The basement had no windows and thick walls. It was a well-insulated modern Swiss house. There was no sound enabled on the computer and no video playing. I can always tell when sound comes from the speakers because I hear fine in my left ear. The noise was so sudden and strange that I moved faster than I ever have. It took me months to go down there again and feel safe, and I never really did. I always looked around and remained alert while using the computer. The nannies at the time also reported strange sightings. My little brother, who was 6 then, once came down from the 4th floor crying and panicking because he said he saw a large dark figure enter one of the small doors where the toys were stored. The entire 4th floor was our playroom and had 2 small storage rooms that did not lead anywhere and only held toys. The second strange event happened to both of us. We were sleeping when we heard a bell ring in the middle of our room. The sound was very clear and both of us heard it. At first we thought it might be a toy left in the room, but the bell began to ring every night after that, always at the same time. Whenever it rang, both of us woke up instantly and fully alert. My mother and grandmother heard it too when they slept with us to check on it. We never discovered the source. Even after removing everything and leaving only our 2 mattresses in the room, the bell kept ringing. My grandmother, who was very religious, began to pray every night before the bell's hour. After several months it vanished, only to reappear several months later in the new apartment we moved to after our parents' divorce, 200 kilometers away. Again it stopped after repeated prayer and never returned. Over the years I considered all possible external explanations, such as sound from the computer or from outside. The neighboring houses were not attached, and in the 1990s it would have been difficult to prank several people consistently. The bell always seemed to come from the middle of the room and continued after we moved. I get chills remembering that period. Paranormal or not, it was an intense time for everyone. Story 25. I was a teenager, still living in my childhood home. The laundry room was on the carport, and it was nighttime as I put a load of laundry into the washing machine. Something fell on my shoulder. It was dark, warm, and wet. I looked up into the rafters and saw a huge rat sitting there, casually eating part of something furry. Blood was dripping on me. Story 26. I lived in a basement apartment. In the corner of the living room was the water meter, which had a small glowing light that cast a dim glow up the wall when the lights were off. I never had a problem with spiders, but one night at 1 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and looked into the living room. Descending from the ceiling, bathed in that light, was a spider the size of my hand. creeping down and disappearing behind the water meter. I did not go into the living room for 2 days after that. Eventually, I summoned the courage to search for it, but I never found it. Story 27. I am Australian. It was about the size of a dinner plate, a huntsman spider, when I was a child living in Australia. I tried to flush it down the toilet, but it ran back up. Story 28. This person, 6 feet 2 inches tall and 180 pounds, follows me around and keeps telling me he is my husband. What the heck? Story 29. Lately, when I get to the bottom of the stairs and turn the corner, I sometimes see a figure at the top, just in my peripheral vision. Story 30. My dad. I remember waking in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and seeing him sitting in an armchair in the dim light, his eyes open, staring at nothing, completely still, with that psychotic expression he naturally has. His face looks a lot like Jack Nicholson's, by the way. I walked up and stood watching him for a few minutes. He did not move. Story 31. All these flies used to crawl out from behind the washing machine. When I inspected, I found hundreds of maggots, which I scooped up with a spade and threw into the neighbor's garden. The flies were disabled and could only crawl on the floor and up the walls. When they tried to climb, they fell onto their backs and spun while buzzing. I swept them into a corner, where they vibrated until they slowly died. Story 32. My father died in my house in a hospital bed beside an open window. 3 seconds later, a clear body image floated out the window. Chills. Story 33. One night when I was a young kid, I was lying in bed staring into the hallway. After a while, I saw a really tall figure over 7 feet slowly walk from the left end of the hallway to the right. It glowed white and had a triangle-shaped head, like Spy vs. Spy, but a normal humanoid body. Terrified me. I quickly rolled over and pulled the blankets over my head. After a bit, I looked again and it was gone. I also saw a short shadow man wearing a bowler hat standing in the middle of my living room late at night when I was a kid. He did not startle me. He appeared for a second and disappeared when I blinked. I was more confused than anything. Story 34. My house has a lot of unusual occurrences. One I find particularly interesting is that people often say they can hear music or people talking when nobody is home. When I leave, everything is turned off, but you can often hear the sounds at the front door. People told me that for years before I heard it myself. Now when I hear it and others are with me, I ask them to listen and they always hear it. There are many other unusual things that have happened here I can share if anyone is interested. Story 35. A man I did not know, apparently on drugs, tried to jiggle the handle and kick the door in. I had no choice but to use my gun. My wife screamed at about 100 decibels the whole time, which made it more frightening. Story 36. Once I was outside with my ex. My dog started jumping, sniffing the air, barking, and acting strange. We both felt a weird vibe. When we walked into the house, his son was playing virtual reality. He said, "I think we have a ghost." We both felt a chill and asked why. He said it had shown someone in his safety bubble a few minutes earlier. We all felt creeped out. Story 37. Waking up to a millipede crawling right next to me on my bed. I don't think I've ever come closer to actually shitting my bed. Story 38. I just moved into our new apartment, and my boyfriend stayed behind in the old one to pay rent until the lease expired. So for 6 months I was on my own. It was an apartment on the edge of a pleasant town and my first time completely living alone. The layout was a rectangle with a long hallway connecting the rooms. I moved in and the pandemic started almost immediately, so I was alone. It felt both exhilarating and creepy. One night, I woke up to loud scratching coming from the front door at the end of the hallway. It was 3:30 a.m. and I was a young woman alone in an apartment, and someone seemed to be trying to break in. I crept down the hallway and yelled that I had a gun, and the scratching stopped. I have never owned a gun. Then the sound started again, this time from the kitchen. I realized the scratching was coming from my cabinets and that it was a small rodent. After walking around, I traced it to the cabinets above the fridge. A squirrel had come in through an air duct and into the wall behind my cabinets. I called maintenance. They removed the squirrel and replaced the mesh to keep animals out. I had no other issues after that. The maintenance worker felt awful when I told him the story because he had thought it was someone trying to break in, and he reassured me the neighborhood was very safe. Story 39. My ex-wife was losing her mind to bipolar disorder. Deep in a manic state, she began pretending she couldn't speak English, then reverted to Spanish, then could not speak Spanish either, and tried to use American Sign Language. I was on the phone with her cousin, crying and saying I thought she was losing it. She was, and I don't know if she ever got it back. I was trying to come up with a plan to help. Then she barged into the room, grabbed a stack of paper off my desk, and yelled in a loud, exaggerated voice, "Record this." So I did. She spent the next 5 minutes scribbling "help me" on sheet after sheet, like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. We had just returned from the emergency room, where she demanded a magnetic resonance imaging scan. They found nothing wrong, but some part of her knew this wasn't right. There was clearly something wrong with her brain. That was one of the worst nights of my life, and many worse nights followed. I ended the relationship during the second Manic episode. Story 40. My old house was a split-level, 3-story home. I was working from home that day because it had snowed. I live in the southern United States and people there are not used to snow. I was on a Microsoft Teams call with the 4 company owners, cameras on. Suddenly, I heard my dogs losing their minds and someone moving around in the kitchen. My chow ran to my office door and started pawing and growling. I said, "Hey, I think someone might be breaking into my house. I am going to check." But the owners thought I was joking. I did not mute myself. My chow was at the top of the stairs, growling like Cujo. I slowly walked down the stairs and saw my pit bull wagging her tail and looking at someone in the kitchen. It turned out the cleaning service had messed up the schedule and accidentally sent someone 2 days in a row. We had a lockbox with a code for them. It was a sweet elderly woman who gave the pit bull a treat and immediately won her over. My chow was not pleased. Story 41. A stranger broke into my kitchen and tried to steal my microwave oven. Story 42. The Blue Mother still does not make sense to me, and when I tell my family they laugh it off. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, we lived in my great-great-aunt's house. It creeped me out because I knew she had died in the den and I had already had a few strange experiences in the duplex we had moved from. The house was laid out as one long hallway that connected the den, kitchen, dining room, living room, and all the bedrooms with a bathroom at the back. Except for the living room, you could see and walk through each space until you reached the bedrooms. My mother had set up the family computer in a corner that faced the hallway. At the time, we were struggling for money, and my mother often had to leave me home alone for 30 minutes to an hour while she finished her shift. By then, we had lived there for at least a year, and I was comfortable in the house as long as I had music playing. I even started to look forward to being home alone so I could play music and games in peace. One day, I walked in after school and it felt odd. The house felt dead, but at the same time, it felt like someone was there. I called out to see if anyone was home, because sometimes she was still at work, but there was no answer. I played music and games at the computer, but I kept feeling strange. Eventually, I had an overwhelming sense of being watched, so I swung around in the chair and met my mother's eyes. I grew up with a mother who often walked around nude, so that was not unusual, but this time she looked blue, and the back half of the house looked darker than usual. Even with the lights off and the windows covered, it did not usually get that dark. Everything looked cold. We locked eyes and stared at each other for 30 seconds to a minute, until I felt an overwhelming urge to turn back around. I turned the music down in case I was disturbing her and felt off for about 20 minutes when I suddenly heard the back door in the den, about 15 feet away, unlock. I looked up and saw my mother coming in through the back door, key in the lock, carrying groceries. I was terrified and confused because I knew I had just seen her nude in the back of the house. I asked if she had used the front door earlier and noticed she was wearing her work clothes. She said no. She had just come from work. We rarely used the front door unless there was a party. I asked if she was pranking me. She denied it, and I knew she was telling the truth. She had not been there. I knew I had seen a blue version of her, but it was not my mother. Years later, in my sophomore year of college, I was talking to my older sister, who is more spiritual. She said she had seen the same thing in that house. We have not seen that exact apparition since, but we have concluded that something follows our mother. The same kind of energy from those experiences seems to have followed her from house to house. Story 43. My husband and I took our plates to the den to eat and watch television. I left the rest of the food on the stove in the kitchen. About 20 minutes later, he got up to go back into the kitchen for something. I heard him call my name in a distressed voice. When I went into the kitchen, there were about 50 large black flies all over the food, the windows, and the counters. Felt like a plague from biblical times. There had been no flies when I was making dinner. It was as if they had just appeared out of nowhere. We never discovered where they came from, and after we sucked most of them up with a shop vacuum, we did not see them again. Story 44. I heard someone say who is there, but only my cat was present. I became paranoid, thinking she was a skinwalker, until she died. Story 45. The closet in my son's room has sliding mirror doors. At night, when he wakes, I go in to settle him back to sleep, and the dark reflections and large shadows from his nightlight creep me out. Most of the time, I just bring him back to bed with me. Story 46. A month or so ago, as I was walking to bed, a doll I had never seen before turned, yawned, and said good night. My ex's daughters moved away late last year, followed by my ex. My house is still full of toys and clothes, with no room to organize, give, or throw anything away. The doll was in a box full of dolls, and I had never seen or heard it before. If those girls had found it, I would have recognized it as soon as I heard it. That was not too strange. What surprised me was that it said good night to me. The switch was recessed and took a lot of effort to actuate manually. I have fairly strong hands. It was not a button but a recessed on-off switch. When I pulled it out of the box, it was off. Story 47. I heard a noise in the middle of the night and got up to check the kids. In the dark hallway, I saw a spider-like creature about 3 feet wide and low to the ground. My heart stopped and I froze in place. I clicked on the light and saw my son monkey crawling back to his room. "What are you doing?" "I don't know, I just felt like crawling." Scared the shit out of me. Story 48. Several months ago, I experienced sleep paralysis while napping on the couch. I heard fire alarms in the house and tried to get up, but my body was locked. I felt my eyelids flutter as I tried to open them. I thought of my children being in danger and needing to get them out. I finally woke up in a panic. The fire alarms were just part of the dream. Story 49. I swear I see movement out of the corner of my eye every single night. It was creepy the first few weeks, but I have gotten used to it by now. Story 50. My child, when he was about 4, got a bloody nose in his sleep. He got up, tried to find the light switch, and left bloody handprints along the wall. When he finally found the switch and turned on the light, he was frightened by the handprints, which were his own. He began screaming, and I ran down the hall in my pajamas at 2 a.m. When I saw the handprints, I screamed as well. A few minutes later, my husband stumbled down and said, "What the heck, guys?" Story 51. A massive brown recluse spider makes my skin crawl. Story 52. I fell asleep on my couch while it was still daylight. I must not have closed the door properly, because it was wide open when I woke up many hours later in the dark. Fortunately, the screen door was closed. Story 53. I moved into my townhouse a month after renting it, so it had sat unoccupied for a while on the rental market. After moving in and getting settled, we had a pile of items that needed to go into the attic. When I went up, it looked like someone had been living there. Tapestries were hung from the walls and ceiling, a makeshift bed was set up, and there was a bag of what appeared to be clothing, old work boots, and several empty foam gas station cups and food wrappers. It was shocking. Story 54. When I was 16, I walked home from school and opened the front door to find a man I did not know, naked and sprawled out on my couch. My mother was out of town. My stepsister had come over to do laundry and did not know I would be home. Turned out she was having an affair. Story 55. My older sister was home alone when she heard someone call her name. Her boyfriend was supposed to have left a few minutes earlier, so she wondered if he had not actually gone out the front door. She went downstairs to check, but the house was empty. Returning upstairs, she found footprints the size of a woman's in talcum powder on the landing carpet. This happened 30 years ago, and we still have not found an explanation for those footprints. Story 56. Palmetto bugs occasionally appear, but it is very clean here and dry outside. When I lived in an apartment in college, we had rats that chewed through the dishwasher hose. Our place was clean, but because I had a dog, we could hear the rats come out and eat the dog food. One of my roommates lay on the floor and watched them emerge. They were black with shiny coats from the dog food. I called maintenance, who fixed the dishwasher and sealed the hole. The rats never came back. Story 57. The creepiest thing was opening the small compost bin we kept in the kitchen for scraps and finding maggots. My lazy brother put his roast chicken that had gone off in it, which led to the infestation. I am not too scared of bugs, but a sudden mass of them can unexpectedly make a person jump. Story 58. My wife used to have a music box with a little clown holding two sticks. You could wind it up and it would start dancing to music. She placed it on a shelf when we moved in about 4 years ago. She never touched it, and neither did I. One evening in November, I think it got dark early. She was working and I was busy playing Dead Space at home. Out of nowhere, the music box started playing for about 5 seconds. I completely froze and stared at it. Needless to say, I turned my personal computer off, put the music box away, and tried to cover my fear with some funny movies. I was terrified and turned every light on. I still had to take a shower and wash my hair. I did not close my eyes for that. Pain is for the weak. Story 59. I found unlabeled videotapes in the rafters of the basement of my newly purchased house 10 years ago. Fortunately, I have not owned a video cassette recorder for 25 years. Story 60. Before I replaced my back door, I occasionally found a slug slithering across the kitchen floor when it rained. Story 61. My cat is a creepy little rascal who likes to hide in closets and under beds. Story 62. Not in my current home. My childhood home was haunted by a man who had died there before we moved in. He would quickly yank the shower curtain wide open while someone was showering. I thought I was being superstitious until it happened to several of my friends, even though I had not mentioned it. All of a sudden, I heard screaming from the bathroom and knew exactly what it was. Story 63. The electricity and gas bill on the counter scares me. Story 64. I saw a 1 to 2 foot spider on the wall. Turns out my night terrors involve spiders. Story 65. A bat flew down the chimney and got stuck behind the fireplace screen, screeching loudly. Years ago, our cat alerted us to a flying squirrel. Story 66. I obscured some details in case anyone from the family this is about sees this. When I was in elementary school, I was classmates with a kid whose uncle was involved in organized crime. I genuinely did not know which group. He killed someone and admitted it to one of my parents, asking them to be a character witness. My parents refused. The uncle's brother, my classmate's father, repeatedly called my other parent, who was a lawyer at the time, asking if they could represent him. That parent also refused. They kept following up. It bordered on harassment. One parent said we were going away for the weekend and asked them to wait until Monday to discuss it. We went camping. When we came back, a recreational vehicle was parked in the side yard. My parents started to unpack by going around the back. They returned, told me to stay in the recreational vehicle, and said they were calling the police. The back door had been smashed open. It was glass. A single meat cleaver had been left on the patio table. It was just a threat. Nothing had been taken and everything else was in order. I did not know about the murder at the time, but after learning the context, I believe the threats were related. Story 67. My wife and I bought a home from a couple with 3 kids. They seemed like a normal family. About a year after moving in, we noticed that the bedroom door handles had been altered. The couple had reversed the handles on their kids' bedrooms so they could lock the children inside. Story 68. A giant lizard was on my window. I went to see who was outside, and all I saw was its long tail, like a gecko. Story 69. If you ignore cockroaches for too long, they will get everywhere. Story 70. Growing up in a haunted house, I saw some crazy things. I once saw a black mass move through the house on a bright day, and dishes flew off the table. Story 71. There was an ant nest with an opening somewhere in our house, and every June we would get hundreds of flying ants. The colony has since collapsed, so there are no more ants. Yay! Story 72. I was asleep in the front room when I heard white noise, like an old television static. I woke up and a few steps away was a transparent dark figure, almost static looking. In a second, it was on top of me. I couldn't yell or scream. I was frozen. Then it got off me. The next day, I told my partner. She said her brothers had told her the same story over the years, supposedly a curse from a previous owner. Months later, near where it happened in Rosemead, it showed up in my rearview mirror while I was at work in Glendale. During my break, I already knew who it was from the static noise. I felt it was a little reminder that they hadn't forgotten me. It hasn't happened again, but if I hear that static sound with no television around, it's not a good sign. This was many years ago. That was my ex-wife's house. My son still lives there. I haven't told him yet. Story 73. A very thick glass ashtray about the size of a dinner plate shattered while not in use. No one was around and there were no animals. Also, 6 margarita glasses flew out of my china cabinet, where they are stored upside down. Story 74. My childhood home was a large old house. The man who built it had run a school for foster children in the house, which was creepy. One night, I went downstairs to the kitchen to get some water. I got my water and was walking out when I heard a noise in the kitchen. I turned and walked halfway in, then stopped dead in my tracks. All the cabinets were wide open. I was completely freaked out and started yelling for my nanny. Yes, I know, privileged. She called out asking where I was. I said the kitchen. She started to run down the back steps that connect part of the upstairs to the kitchen. I could hear her begin to say something. Then bam! The door to the stairs slammed shut and the cabinets slammed closed behind me. Turned to make sure what I had heard was real, and it was. Every single cabinet was now closed. I began to run, and she caught me as I was leaving. She was scared and thought I had slammed the door on her. We argued and worked it out, but she still did not really believe me. I have thought about it a lot. For a long time I thought it was a prank she played on me, but I do not know how she would have done that then, let alone in the 1990s. In the same house, I was once sleeping on a Boy Scout cot. I was falling asleep with my feet out of the covers when I heard my name and was pulled halfway off the cot. I do not believe in ghosts, but that house may have been haunted, or someone was playing a very good prank. Story 75. I do not believe in ghosts, but this has happened in my house. I moved in 2022. The house was built in 1973, and the original owner died there. 1. We have heard footsteps in the hallway at various times when we are alone. We attribute them to pets, 2 dogs and 2 cats, but the rational part of me knows that bipedal footsteps do not sound like animal footsteps, and these did. 2. I was in my bedroom looking out the window while I was home alone and clearly heard a male voice say, "Turn around." I did. The room was empty and the door was shut. 3. I was home with only my 19-year-old son and my 5-year-old son. The 5-year-old had been asleep for a while and my 19-year-old and I were watching a television show. We heard a bedroom door open at the back of the house, footsteps running down the hallway, and the bathroom door slam shut. We assumed it was the 5-year-old, and even said, he must have needed to pee, then paused the show. He never came back out. I went to check. The bathroom was empty, the door open, and the lights off. I went to his room and he was sound asleep in the same position I had left him. He had not covered himself back up, and it had been less than 5 minutes from start to finish. It gave us both the heebie-jeebies. I am still skeptical of ghosts, but I am a little more open to residual hauntings. Story 76. A venomous snake got into the house. The cat killed it before I knew it was there. The cat was okay and was hailed as a hero that night. Story 77. I heard a phone ringing on my porch at 3 in the morning last year. Story 78. I have spiders in the basement. They are plain old jumping spiders, and I am not bothered by spiders in general. They keep other bugs at bay, run away fast, and there are only a couple. I just let them be. One day I saw a little papery ball on the floor. It didn't look man-made, so I got a dustpan and hand broom to brush it into the garbage. When I brushed it, the horde emerged. Tens of thousands of tiny spiders poured out like something from Charlotte's Web and began fleeing. They were incredibly fast. By the time I got the vacuum, they were mostly gone into my living room. After a bit of thought, I went to the basement. I am still there, vacuuming up all the little spiders. Many egg sacs must have hatched. Someday I will see the sun again, but for now I vacuum tiny spiders. Story 79. Scene: the ghost cat. Every once in a while a shadowy cat appears, sometimes gray, sometimes black. I catch it darting around from the corner of my eye, but we feel it more often than we see it. It curls up with my wife nearly every night. She feels the weight on the bed, against her legs, and the vibration of the purr. I have felt it too, but not as often as she has. Our living cat plays with the ghost cat sometimes, jumping and batting at nothing until you hear a thud from the ghost cat landing. It also likes to rock the television on top of our dresser, as if walking behind it. The creepiest thing I experienced was hearing footsteps coming down the stairs, turning to look, and finding no one there. I thought it was my wife coming downstairs before I left for work. The family who lived in the house before us had two little girls who always played with their grandpa. 2 weeks after I moved in and was living alone, I was on my computer and felt a hand on my shoulder, just him saying hi. Multiple times he has woken my wife when she falls asleep on the couch because it hurts her back if she does not go to bed. Doors have opened and closed by themselves. Once he threw an empty purse across the living room, which was strange to see. Every so often there is an overwhelming negative feeling in certain rooms, either the spare bedroom upstairs or the old coal room in the basement, like something evil is present and does not want you there. Thankfully, that has become rarer, especially after the ghost cat showed up. Story 80. Man, I am not sure what they are called. I keep finding strange bugs with a million freaking legs in my house. They seem to be in damp areas such as the cellar, under the kitchen sink, or on the kitchen counter. Some of them are fairly large, about 1 1/4 inches long. When one runs across the counter while I am cooking, I knock it to the floor and mash it with my bare foot. I do not even hesitate. These things give me the creeps. Laughing out loud. Story 81. The house was fairly calm on the spooky front, but a few things made my hair stand on end. A black bear stood with its paws against the sliding door because it wanted a hummingbird feeder. Flies got into the trash bin and produced hundreds of maggots. The worst was a swarm of tiny ants pouring out of an electrical outlet on the kitchen wall. It looked like black foam, and my immediate reaction was to grab Windex. Story 82. A puff of smoke moved through my house, entered my mother's room, and I heard her wail in pain in her sleep, shouting, "No, do not get involved with witches, not even once. If you do, run to the Eastern Orthodox Church. They can help you." Story 83. About 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning my house while the kids slept in on a Saturday morning. I was mopping when I heard a ping, and a penny was beside my feet. I had not seen a penny in ages. My mom used to believe in pennies from heaven, and dimes meant that someone who had passed away was visiting you. Story 84. I remember the only time we ever opened the attic. A bunch of crumbly bits of rotten wood fell out. That is all I remember. Story 85. I woke up in an aunt's home while visiting Côte d'Ivoire, and the first thing I saw when I sat up was a massive termite mound that had appeared overnight in one corner of the room. Story 86. I woke up because I heard footsteps in the hallway. I listened for a few seconds and they stopped. It was an old house converted into several apartments. I thought it was the neighbors or the house settling and started to drift off when I heard the footsteps again. I sat up a little, but there was nothing. My girlfriend was still asleep beside me. I lay back down, and then it felt like someone slammed their hands on the bed. I shot upright, but no one was there. The place was creepy in general. Occasionally, the lights in the room would turn off. There was a hallway between the living room and our bedroom, and when you went to bed at night, it always felt like someone was behind you. I was so glad when we moved out. Story 87. We lived in the woods. I kept my front door open because it was a beautiful day. I was in the kitchen feeding my 1-year-old when a strange man emerged from the woods carrying a knife. His dog entered the kitchen, and he followed, looking for his lost pet. I told him we had not seen a dog, and he stood there staring at me. My neighbor came over, escorted him out of the house, and they talked for a while. Then he left. Story 88. My first apartment was a studio in an old Victorian house. The bedroom was separated by a wall. One night my boyfriend said he heard something heavy moving in the living room. In the morning we found scratches on the hardwood floor by the couch, as if it had been pushed back and forth. The feet were hard, so they would have left marks. The scratches had not been there the day before. Story 89. A wolf spider waved at me with two big, furry legs through a crack that led to my attic. Story 90. I just saw a barefoot print on the weights in our basement the other day. We never go into the basement barefoot. Story 91. Around 2:30 a.m., I wake up, unsure why, and look around the dark, eerily silent room. I notice my door is slightly open, but not enough for someone to fit through. To the right of the door, a shadow stands motionless. Suddenly it moves toward me, closing the space between us before I can defend myself, and says, "Daddy, I have to pee." Story 92. It was not something I saw, but something I heard. We lived in a very old, 17th century house and often heard someone walking upstairs and had feelings of being watched. We had not lived there long when my husband had to travel for the weekend to look after his sick mother, approximately 300 miles away. I had gone to bed and fallen asleep. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke suddenly to a sound like an air raid siren. It seemed to come from my sleep, woke me, and then stopped almost immediately. I did not know if it was real or a dream. It sounded as if it were coming from the ceiling. A couple of seconds later, my eldest son, who was about 12 at the time, ran into my room crying and shaking, describing the same sound at exactly the same moment. We either both had the same dream at the same time or the sound was real. There was absolutely nothing in that house that would make a noise like that. The house stood in the grounds of a large manor with no close neighbors. It definitely sounded as if it were inside the house. I still cannot explain it. I also had a very scary experience in my aunt's house several years ago, but that is a story for another day. Story 93. I saw my grandmother after she died. I was probably sleep deprived or psychotic. Terrified me. Story 94. Once, when I was home alone, the bathtub turned on. It has been years and it never happened again. I thoroughly searched the house and did not see anything else suspicious. I remember telling my husband, who is usually unbothered and often knows why things happen, and even he asked if I had checked the cameras. Story 95. I work from home and my office is in the basement, so I notice a few things. The light was on in the crawl space, which was odd because it is the middle of spring and we only store our Christmas decorations there. Then a light in my office was on. It was not an automatic light but one that must be turned on manually, and it was in the messy storage area that I can access easily. I keep that office locked so no one could have entered. To this day, I have not discovered what caused either light to be on. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.